I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's June 13th, and we have a lot to talk about. When you're living with MS, traveling can sometimes feel like a huge undertaking, and air travel in particular can get complicated. We're heading into the summer vacation season, so the timing couldn't be better to talk with my friend and fellow MS activist, Dr. Scott Crawford. Dr. Crawford lives with MS, and he has extensive experience as a passenger on commercial airlines. He holds a PhD in clinical psychology with a subspecialty in neuropsychology from the University of Southern Mississippi. Dr. Crawford is a member of the National MS Society's Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi Chapter Board of Trustees, and like me, he's a district activist leader. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Scott Crawford, there are a few other things that you should know about. I want to remind you about two important events taking place this week, and you can participate in both of them virtually. This Wednesday and Thursday, June 14th and 15th, between 1 and 4 p.m. Eastern Time, the National MS Society is hosting the 2023 Black MS Experience Summit. Feelings of isolation and invisibility are pervasive in the Black MS community. Many people struggle to feel seen, heard, and get the support they need to live their best lives. So this year's summit is focused on resisting invisibility and embracing identity. There's no cost for you to participate in the Black MS Experience Summit, and this event provides an outstanding opportunity to hear from healthcare experts, to share your story, amplify your voice, and build connections in the Black MS community. Also on Thursday, June 15th, I'll be hosting a global webcast live from the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Congress in Vienna, Austria. This will be a great opportunity for you to hear about the very latest cutting-edge progressive MS research, so I hope you're planning to join me this Thursday live from Vienna. And you'll find links to register for both of these virtual events in today's show notes. When people ask me how I pick guests to interview on the podcast, I always have the same answer. I look for difference makers. And today, I'd like you to meet two difference makers. Julie Stamm was diagnosed with MS in 2007. She's an amazing patient advocate, and she's been a guest on the podcast before. For her latest project, Julie collaborated with Dr. Jenny Wu, a Harvard-trained educator, emotional intelligence researcher, and the founder of a company called Mind, Brain, Emotion. And I'm going to let Julie and Dr. Wu tell you all about 52 Essential Inclusion Skills, an A to Z guide to kindness, compassion, and respect for diverse abilities. In a moment, we'll meet Julie Stamm and Dr. Jenny Wu. Julie Stamm was diagnosed with MS in 2007. She's a patient advocate with a powerful voice, and she's the author of Some Days, A Tale of Love, Ice Cream, and My Mom's Chronic Illness, a book that was inspired by many of the real-life moments Julie shared with her son, Jack. We talked with Julie when her book was first published, and now she's collaborated on a new project with Dr. Jenny Wu, a Harvard-trained educator, emotional intelligence researcher, and the founder of a company called Mind, Brain, Emotion. Today, we're talking about what I think is a remarkable deck of cards called 52 Essential Inclusion Skills, an A to Z guide to kindness, compassion, and respect for diverse abilities. Julie, Dr. Wu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Wu, Mind, Brain, Emotion has released a number of card decks focused on building skills and developing what I'll call better coping mechanisms. The decks address issues like navigating social dilemmas for kids in the 6th through 8th grades. And if I remember my time in the 6th through 8th grade, everything felt like a social dilemma. Developing healthy relationships, developing critical thinking skills, among several others. What's the theory behind these decks and this approach to personal development?
Sure, John. So I like to say that these are the essential skills that never go out of style. And I've really worked across lifespans, and the common thread is, I want to help people realize their potential on their own terms. And this requires a set of skills that we don't necessarily learn in schools, nor get the opportunities to practice. So as a Montessori school director, I saw that on the playground, as well as their parents, and then working as an educator in K-12 and later, and still now lecture at the university level, and then worked in human resources and human capital consulting around employee engagements and wellness, all the way to working as a cognitive science researcher with adults 70 plus around memory interventions. And it's these things that I realized that in order to have that quality of life and really thrive on your own terms, right, despite life's difficulties and obstacles that we all face from day to day, what can we do? And so the essence is really distilling research into concrete, actionable, and accessible ways so that everyone can apply them on their own terms.
So, Julie, the project you've worked on with Dr. Wu is called 52 Essential Inclusion Skills, an A to Z guide to kindness, compassion, and respect for diverse abilities. What can you tell me about it?
Well, I got very lucky that I was talking to my sister, and my sister-in-law was listening in, and she said, you need to connect with Jenny. She works on these card games. I had a vision of creating a card game, but not really kind of a matching style game. So it would be illustrations that had people with different abilities on them. So that I just want children to be aware that there are differences and it's okay to ask questions. And it's also okay to see this in everyday life because we don't get enough representation. And selfishly, I know that from an MS point of view, I'm getting worse. And the use of an aid is probable. And I don't want kids to be hesitant to come up to me and ask me questions. I want this to be a normal thing. I want my son to embrace it. I want him to be proud. And I think starting the conversations, I think Jenny had a really great point. Without the words, it could probably do a little bit of harm without having some more background. And I had already worked on my second children's book, which was going to be an A to Z guide. So we kind of put the idea together. We both were like, well, A to Z, that's 26 letters times 2. 52 was her thing. And I was like, wait a minute. And Jenny was like, and then I was really concerned about illustrations because I really wanted to show what differences look like. And Jenny was like the brilliant mind and was just like, how about a Humans of New York style where we actually highlight real people? And that was essential for me because now we have a hero on each card and each of those heroes is proud. Each of those feels like they're represented now where they haven't been. I mean, we have from everything, every disease you could possibly think of or difference, and they're with pride. There's no negative. There's only, here's how my life is amazing and here's what brings me joy. And it's never something tangible. It's about family and love and acceptance. And that's what the deck is about to me.
I was about to ask you about those 52 Essential Inclusion Skills heroes. So thanks for bringing it up. I'm curious, how did you find them?
Well, I am really big in the advocacy world, so it was pretty easy. I think narrowing it down has been the hard part. So we have a lot. We have 52 on the deck, but we have new stories coming in every day. So we're going to have more than 52 on the website. Luckily, Jenny is the mastermind behind that because I would malfunction with all that technology. But we are getting more stories, and I'm learning from. And I had a MS advocate that I've worked with that her son developed pediatric cancer, and so it's led to, and people that just you realize that every friend that you has someone in their life that has a difference. that's why it was easy, because this is the reality. And Jenny, correct me when I'm wrong, I think it's 1 in 6 of us have a different ability. So we're here. I mean, the issue is that the world lets us see it, but media and everything, we don't really see us. So we're committed to making us seen.
Yeah. And, we want to reframe the type of lens that people see what normal means. And of course, the language that we use. And, just sidestep, I have to say, Julie is like the most tenacious woman I know. And so getting
he knows.
52, like 52 heroes or 54 or 60. I mean, we're actually not stopping at there. We're continuing this whole journey, and we hope to continue to feature up to hundreds and more of these unsung kid, teen, and adult heroes. And again, we're learning so much. I think it's a whole learning process for everyone. And part of the learning is also we've created a myth quiz around different abilities, right? Things, these common questions that we're afraid to ask, right? How does the person in wheelchair swim, right? Or go to the restroom? Or how does, from all kinds of different abilities. And so it's a way to also educate the public and to these biases and misconceptions that are floating around.
I'm curious, Dr. Wu, from Julie's perspective, I can clearly understand how important a deck like this is. What was important to you about creating this deck?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also have an invisible disability. And to be honest, for the longest time, I've been a bit in denial. And part of my work is very much showcasing inclusivity. I've done a lot of work around neurodivergence. And John, as you mentioned, social dilemmas, that deck is really around building the language and the scripts for those, who need more support around how to deal with difficult situations, and really also for everyone to embrace the differences in, the student body in this case. And for me, my disability or difference really stemmed from childhood. And, now having been someone graduated from Harvard, sort of been in the ivory tower, when I was little, it was not like that. I'm the first one to graduate college in my family. And my difference would have been treatable had it been in early childhood. But because my parents didn't have the resource, in fact, I wanted to be a doctor, but my dad didn't trust doctors because he couldn't understand them. And so he thought the best solution was not to go see them. You see the irony in here. And so it's really my way, again, it's about making skills, knowledge, and even confidence and language accessible really for everyone to consume instead of staying to the privileged few.
So tell us, how should people use this deck to get the most out of it?
Well, I mean, I think it's very important for people to know how to advocate for themselves. And we have an advocate, like how to advocate for yourself and how to advocate for others, just a checklist that they can go through. Like, am I asking the right questions? Have I prioritized my needs? And then we have, and just the language, just familiarizing people with things that might seem scary, like the term hospital or emergency, and then having children and adults discuss how they felt when they were in these situations, what it's like to be a patient. How did they feel when they were a patient? What does it mean to have what does chronic mean? Because chronic doesn't necessarily, it's just something that lasts a long time. It could be nail biting. It could be a lot of things. So I think all those terms, I know from having an almost 7-year-old, seem scary. The word hospital is terrifying, but if you talk about it in a way that makes it normal, and treatment, these are important things. He's used to me going to the hospital for treatment. That can't be scary anymore. We have to make that something that's empowering, and I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that I'm, strong and available to be here for you. So that was really important to me. So the words are very important, and I think we carefully selected them because we really want to make all of them reflective items that you can look back, and there are questions and prompts in each of these that will make each person reflective. And I think that's very important just for every age.
Yeah, well said, Julie. So it's really, A to Z letter, and each letter stands for a word, sort of naming it to tame it, right? The words that were considered, should I talk about it? How do I ask these questions, right? How do I connect with someone about it? And how do I use this word to advocate for myself? And each card comes with a definition, but the other pair of the card comes with eye-opening and thought-provoking prompts. So an example of it is, N for numb, right? When a part of your body or emotion is numb, right? We wanted to talk about physical health and emotional mental health, how integrative it is, right? And that means you either can't feel it or don't feel it as well. So that card goes on to talk about what numbing really means in every context. And then the card that pairs with it is, imagine losing feelings in a part of your body. How would that make everyday tasks more challenging? That's just one of the many questions. But I think it's really altering perspectives and to help everybody understand how can we make the world and our environments more accessible. And again, this is for little ones and adult in languages that can understand. And we're also, not just patients, but we're caretakers and caregivers. And so these are all the languages that can support not only ourselves, but others around us.
Dr. Wu, the company you founded, Mind, Brain, Emotion, has a rather notable pedigree. It was born at the Harvard Innovation Labs at Harvard University. How did that come about?
Yeah. So, John, I got a lot of degrees. I like to joke around and say that because I'm the first one to graduate for your college, I'm kind of accumulating like 2 masters and a PhD for my parents and my grandparents. So at the tender age of 35, I decided to go back to school again. And this was after a master's in business administration from UC Berkeley. I pivoted after having my own 3 children, 2 of which were preemie twins. One weighed less than 3 pounds. So very much I dealt with advocating for her health throughout the process. And so at Harvard, going into there, the minute I stepped in, I actually told a colleague of mine that I was not there to simply matriculate and get a degree paper. I wanted to carry something out with me and something that would be meaningful and beneficial to the world. I'm too old to just get another degree paper. And so that was my mission. And again, it's about distilling a very complex research and the latest that, laymen don't usually get access to in a way that we can all intelligently understand, decipher, and apply in our own lives. And so was privileged enough to get accepted to the Harvard Innovation Lab, which is a venture incubation program that was offered for students and staff faculty. And there I started prototyping and really using the most cleverly simple way to distill and disseminate knowledge and skills.
So, Julie, tell us how people can find 52 Essential Inclusion Skills, an A to Z guide to kindness, compassion, and respect for diverse abilities.
Well, hop on Jenny's website. So it's mindbrainemotion.com. And you can see all of her decks there. And we have all of our heroes also there. So even if you're not buying the deck, you can get a glimpse into what it's like to live with a different ability. But we encourage everyone to really check out the deck, and it will be available on Amazon and Walmart, and hopefully at your local toy store, which I'm working on. I'm going to 2 today. When I'm committed to doing something, it happens. So I am very committed to making differences normal. And I don't think disability is a bad word. I identify as someone that's disabled, and I'm committed to letting children realize that we're all out here and it's okay to be different and embrace those differences.
Well, Julie Stamm, Dr. Jenny Wu, thank you for creating a tool that's really designed to make our world kinder, more compassionate, and more respectful toward people with diverse abilities. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much, John.
You.
Thank you.
Speaking of kindness, compassion, and respect, it occurs to me that those are the very qualities that are often missing if you're living with a disability and traveling by air. But it doesn't have to be that way. Dr. Scott Crawford is a neuropsychologist who lives with MS, and he's someone with extensive experience as an airline passenger. Dr. Crawford is also an MS activist, and he's here to walk us through how to de-stress airline travel and to explain your rights as an airline passenger if you're living with a disability. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Scott Crawford. It's summer vacation season, and it feels like this year especially, travel has gotten more challenging than I've ever seen it before. If you're living with MS, you already know that travel can be challenging, and that's especially true if you're traveling by air. Joining me to share some strategies for successfully navigating air travel is my fellow MS activist, Dr. Scott Crawford. Dr. Crawford lives with MS, and he has extensive experience as a passenger on commercial airlines. Dr. Crawford holds a PhD in clinical psychology with a subspecialty in neuropsychology from the University of Southern Mississippi. He initially joined the MS Society to advocate for issues that are important to people living with MS on both the state and federal levels. And today, Dr. Crawford is a member of the Society's Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi Board of Trustees. And like me, he's a district activist leader. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Crawford.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Let's start at the beginning of every flight. Let's talk about getting to the airport. Where have you found success when it comes to affordable transportation, parking, and unloading?
Well, if you live in a large city, you probably have a transportation network that will get you easily to and from your airport. But if you live in a smaller city or a smaller area, you need to check well in advance how people with disabilities get to and from the airport. If you use a wheelchair and need wheelchair accessible transportation, you can't take that for granted. So you need to check that in advance. So here in Jackson, we did not have a transportation system. Our JTRAN system does not go to the airport, and we don't have accessible taxis or ride hailing services. So I had to work with our airport to get them to hire a company that would provide wheelchair accessible transportation to and from the airport. But that took some advocacy, but we were successful in getting that done.
What about luggage? Are there services available that can help someone living with MS with their luggage once they arrive at the airport?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very important that you let your airline know well in advance of any needs that you may have, including whether or not you'll need curbside assistance with your luggage. They're required by the Air Carrier Access Act to provide assistance from the curb all the way to your gate. So that's a right that you have, but you must ask for it in advance. And you must be willing to identify yourself as a person with a disability once you arrive.
Okay, now we've gotten ourselves to the airport. Let's talk about the next potentially challenging situation. I'm wondering whether you've experienced any obstacles getting through the TSA checkpoint and onto your gate. And if you have, I hope you'll share any strategies that might improve someone else's experience getting through TSA.
If you're ambulatory, you can walk, you will have less difficulty getting through. But if you're in a wheelchair and you're unable to walk a few feet to get through the scanner or metal detector, you're going to need to stay with your chair, and they'll give you a pat down screening. However, the thing that I urge you to do, and frankly everyone to do, is to get the TSA pre-check clearance. It's about $78. At least it was last I checked. And it is well worth it because it streamlines the screening process, and it will definitely help you get through easier. But you can also go online to a link, TSA Cares, and ask for assistance in advance. And again, you can type in whatever assistance you'll need, but you'll still have to self-identify once you get to the screening area. You must be willing to be assertive with the people that are serving you. Tell them what you need.
I've heard you mention advanced planning a few times already, in everything from figuring out your transportation to the airport, to getting assistance with luggage, to getting through TSA. My takeaway at this early point in our conversation is advanced planning makes a real difference.
Absolutely. Travel is stressful, and making sure you have notes and printed schedules and you've got your itinerary with you and all of that arranged in advance is extremely helpful because, under stress, we all, forget things and get flustered. So having all that written down on notes is extremely helpful. Definitely you want to call your airline or do an online request for accommodation well in advance of your flight. You need to be very specific with them about what you'll need. And then once you get to the airport, self-identify to the people at the airport that you will need special accommodation.
I think we've all heard stories about mobility devices being damaged in a plane's cargo hold. What can someone do to best protect themselves and their property?
Well, in the past, I used to make a very special card that had photos and detailed instructions. I had it laminated and I secured it to my wheelchair. You can do that, and it is helpful. But lately, I've been asking to speak to the ground operations chief and guiding them myself with loading and unloading my chair. Basically, I guide them in configuring my wheelchair right there at the gate of the aircraft, in making sure that it's small enough so it will fit in the cargo hold. I make sure it's done right.
So once a plane is taken off, there you are, you're seated without your mobility device and realize that you need to use the restroom. What then?
Well, again, hopefully you have asked in advance if you are able to walk a few feet. Hopefully you've asked the airline in advance for a seat near the lavatory. That's the first thing that you can do. Unfortunately, most of our aircraft here in the United States are single aisle aircraft and are not required to have an onboard aisle chair. So I recommend that you wear an incontinence undergarment just in case. That's what I do.
And now our plane lands, but we're not yet at our destination. We have a connecting flight. What can you share with us about deplaning and making that connection?
Give yourself extra time. A common mistake is to allow the system to schedule only a 1-hour layover. Don't make that mistake. You need to override the system and make sure that you at least have 2 hours in between flights. Why? Because as a person with a disability, especially one using an aisle chair, you will be the last person to deplane. And that may not happen as quickly as you hope. I've had it take up to 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes to get off a single flight. And of course, if my layover is only an hour, I'm obviously going to miss the connection. So I always make sure I have 2 hours in between flights. And I always make sure that they bring me my wheelchair to the door of the aircraft so that I can see the condition it's in and I can use it myself to independently get to my next connection. I never allow them to check it through. That basically gives up a lot of my independence, and it's just not best practice. You want to be as independent as possible, but if you should need guidance or assistance getting from one gate to the other, you are entitled to that under the Air Carrier Access Act. So be sure to ask for that in advance and ask for assistance at the time of your flight.
You know, earlier, before we started our conversation, you and I were chatting offline, and I thought you made some really insightful and helpful suggestions about how one should navigate through the airport, how one should, to use your phrase, go slow.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. Airports are inherently overstimulating. There's a whole lot going on. There's a lot of background noise. There are all kinds of signs. And we're human beings. And when we're stressed out, our cognition tends to decline. It's a natural thing to happen for everyone, but it's particularly common with MS, especially as we get fatigued. So go slow, check yourself, check your gates, have something written down that you can guide yourself with. Make sure you write down things that you need to know and go slow.
I think if everybody took your advice, airports would be a much saner place than they are these days. Can you tell me what the Airline Transportation Bill of Rights is and how a person living with MS might use it to their advantage?
The Air Carrier Access Bill of Rights is a one-stop shop of everything you need to know as a person with a disability when you fly. I strongly encourage you to download it to your phone or your digital device and read through it the day before you fly, because it literally has everything you need to know, and all of your rights are laid out in plain English. So you'll know in advance if something's going wrong and how to deal with it.
I'm wondering if there are any other considerations people living with MS should keep in mind to ensure that they have a safe experience at the airport and in the air.
Besides downloading the Air Carrier Bill of Rights and being familiar with it, if you believe your rights under the Air Carrier Access Act are being or have been violated, ask to speak with a complaints resolution official. CRO, a complaints resolution official. A CRO is the airline's expert on disability accommodation issues. Airlines are required to make one available to you at no cost, in person at the airport or by telephone during the times they are operating. Now, if the violation is really significant, it's also very helpful to document it later at DOT air travel complaints, FAA air travel complaints.
The National MS Society is supporting legislation that will make air travel easier and more inclusive for everyone. In fact, you and I were both recently in Washington, D.C. to advocate for the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. How do you think that bill will impact air travel for people living with MS?
If passed, it will change everything for the better for people of all abilities. I can't stress enough what a huge win that would be. H.R. 1267 and Senate Bill 545 would require new planes as they're manufactured moving forward to accommodate securing people in their personal mobility devices, like we are on buses, trains, and vans. We want to get the ACAA in the upcoming FAA reauthorization. It would make air travel safer for people of all levels of ability.
Let me say that again. What about people who are living with MS who don't use a mobility device? Will they see benefits from this legislation?
Absolutely. The Air Carrier Access Amendments Act would require broad accessibility standards that would impact all people with disabilities. It would also improve DOT enforcement and grant a private right of action so that the rights of passengers with disabilities can be enforced. So it's all about increasing accountability.
You know, my listeners have heard me rant about this before, but it still puzzles me how when decades ago we as a country decided to make public places accessible. So as you pointed out, that means buses, that means trains, that means taxi cab vans, all of those need to be accessible. And somehow airplanes got left off the list. I'm not sure the how or the why behind that, but I am sure that we need to bring it in line with all the other public access that we've granted to every American. I'm hoping you can give us an update on the current status of this legislation.
Sure. We're working to get the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act included in the FAA Reauthorization Act, which is currently being written in Congress. The current authorization expires at the end of September, so the time to act is right now.
And if people want to get involved, they can go to nationalmssociety.org/advocacy and find out exactly how to use their voice on behalf of their own interests and the interests of everyone in the MS community to make air travel more equitable. I'm curious, Dr. Crawford, you've been involved as an MS activist for more than a decade now. What's important about advocacy to you?
Advocacy is everything to me. It's about improving public policy moving forward so that we have a more welcoming society for people of all abilities. And, you know, we have so many challenges living with MS, access to medications, affordable medications, and all of those policies are being considered by Congress. So we simply must be our own advocates and must get involved in the political process so that we can guide our congressional delegations as to best practices.
Well, Dr. Scott Crawford, thank you for your advocacy on behalf of everyone affected by MS. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Sure. It's my pleasure.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/302. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes, and it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.